Today, there is much excitement about self-driving cars. But back during the Vietnam War, the Navy had an aircraft that could virtually fly itself. After dialing in the coordinates, a pilot could rest assured he and his payload would arrive right on target. It could even land itself on the deck of a carrier. With all its advanced features and its rock-solid design, this aircraft served double duty in the U.S. Air Force for close support and treacherous rescue missions. Conceived by the brain trust of legendary aircraft manufacturer Vought, it was an aircraft for its time and ahead of its time. This was the A-7 Corsair II. By 1963, the U.S. was heavily invested in the Vietnam War. A year earlier, Kennedy had signed the Foreign Assistance Act, offering military aid to nations on the edge of communist expansion. South Vietnam was embroiled in such a conflict as hostilities intensified with the communist North. The Americans made good on their promise, providing the South Vietnamese with equipment, training, and a growing number of military advisors. With an all-out war almost inevitable, the U.S. Armed Services began prepping for battle. The Navy was looking to replace their aging Douglas A-4 Skyhawk. It was a small, subsonic bomber, capable of carrying the same payload as the B-17 bombers of World War II. The Douglas Aircraft Company had manufactured the original A-4 Skyhawk, and they were eager to remain the Navy's light bomber manufacturer. They offered the simplest solution: build a better A-4, and they hoped to circumvent the usual competition for such contracts. However, other manufacturers, including LTV Aerospace, would not stand to be shut out of the process.
The Douglas Company sold the Navy on a non-competitive buy of the A-4 Skyhawk. It was to be the A-4 D6. Our folks got wind of it and reminded the Navy that this probably ought to be a competition which Vought could participate in. And it was.
I said, we ought to compete for that. So I went to Washington and I talked to George Spangenberg, who was in charge of evaluation. I said, we want to compete for that, George. He said, okay, we'll have a competition, but he says, you're not going to win. I said, well, let's see. So we went back and I put together a team, which I think was one of the finest teams I ever had.
LTV and its predecessor, the Chance Vought Aircraft Company, had decades of experience producing a long list of fine Navy aircraft, from the VE-7 Bluebird to the F-4 Corsair to the F-8 Crusader. LTV was fortunate to have an engineering and management team with intimate knowledge of the Navy's unique requirements. Saul Love joined the company in 1943, and he played a part in every aircraft design since the F-4U.
The A-7, which was the absolute highlight of my career, the proposal was led by a gentleman by the name of Saul Love, a very tough but charismatic individual. He used to scare people to death. And I mean, literally, he was one of those tough drivers. I did a cartoon series called Saul Says, because everything we did, when you worked with Saul, nobody would make a decision until they got the word from Saul.
My job, I thought then and still is today, is to get people to do the job the best they can. And I used to tell them, don't do it the way I would do it, because you're not me. Just go do it your own way. Just make sure that your end result is what I would want it to be.
In designing the A-4's replacement, LTV had to achieve one very important objective for the Navy: commonality.
The ground rules were primarily, other than mission, this had to be very compatible. You got many points for compatibility with the current airplane you're building.
As LTV forged the Navy's next light bomber, they were also fortunate to have an excellent foundation to build upon, the F-8 Crusader.
The A-7, in a large sense, was a derivative of the F-8.
The Vought F-8 design was so sound. It was an outstanding fighter, had good maintainability, it was good around the boat, and the basic parameters of the airframe were really acceptable for naval operations.
Although the A-7 was based on the F-8, they were very different aircraft with different requirements. The F-8 was a supersonic fighter with a monstrously long J-57 afterburning turbojet. The A-7 needed a less powerful engine to be able to execute lower altitude bombing missions with accuracy.
The Navy gave us the engine. We had no choice to house that engine, and that engine drove the fuselage, drove the length.
You look at taking the F-8 design and take out the J-57 turbojet, eliminate all that length of afterburner, you can shorten the tail immensely. Then you put in a turbofan, which is a little bit larger diameter with a little higher bypass, and you take the fuselage, which is rather tight, and you can beef it up and kind of box it out to make a little more room for fuel and avionics. Because you shorten the tail, you also have to shorten the nose. So that accounts for a much shorter airplane. It's going to be much easier for deck operations and hangar bay operations.
It's not surprising that the A-7 was fitted with a very different wing than the F-8. As a dogfighter, the F-8 needed speed and agility, while the A-7 needed to carry a truckload of bombs on its wings.
We were very happy with a high-winged airplane, the ability to carry stores that other airplanes couldn't carry or had difficulty carrying.
The F-8, you take the wing, which is already a superior fighter wing, but it's really optimized for high-altitude supersonic, but we already said we're going to go subsonic turbofan. So you take a wing that has about a 42-degree sweep at the quarter chord point, flatten that out to about 35 degrees, yet you use the same technology of a wing planform that has leading-edge droops for slow-speed flight.
The Crusader was so long that it was difficult for pilots to see the deck as they came in for a landing. A unique feature of the F-8's wings was that they were of variable incidence. That is, they pivoted up and down into one of two positions to improve visibility. It was a feature that could be stripped out of the shorter subsonic A-7.
The A-7 wing was optimized by being much larger with some of those changes that it could fly slow enough with the shorter fuselage at the angle of attack necessary and still have visibility and come aboard the boat without having to have the variable incidence.
In order for the A-7 to be successful in the field, it not only needed to stand up to the rigors of war, it also needed to be easy to maintain.
We had a couple objectives. First of all, we wanted it maintainable. Secondly, we wanted it reliable. So we set out to see what we could do to minimize the maintenance man-hours for flight hour. And one of the things we decided was we were going to have an avionics bay right behind the cockpit, and you could open those panels pretty fast and pull all the avionics out. And part of maintenance is the time and access to the stuff that goes to pot most of the time.
Going from the F-8 to the A-7, LTV engineers made a big improvement for engine maintenance.
The F-8, in order to get the engine out, we had to pull the aft section off. It was tied with 4 bolts. And that was a pain in the neck. So one of the guys, Max Sire, I think it was, said, you know, we ought to try and do this without pulling the tail off. So I turned to Jesse Santa Maria and I said, Jesse, what can we do? So he went back and looked at the design, finally got enough tail clearance. So we ended up with a quick removal bottom panel on the aft fuselage so you could just slide the engine out. And that meant that the bulkheads that had the fin and the horizontal tail to them, we had to have a connection across to hold them in place while the engine was out. These were all things we did to design for maintenance man-hours for flight hour.
Although commonality was an objective, with all of the differences between the A-7 and F-8 designs, one has to wonder if any trace of the F-8 was left behind.
The common parts were mostly internal. Actuators, there really weren't that many, to be honest about it.
There might not have been many common parts between the two aircraft, but they shared one important feature. They were both excellent designs. LTV knew they had a winner when they submitted their proposal.
When Vought submitted that design, it clearly became the winning design with all the lessons learned that the F-8 had from Vaught's many, many years in naval aviation.
We submitted a proposal that guaranteed maintenance man hours per flight hour. It guaranteed minimum approach speed, Vmax, load carrying, fatigue requirements, and we fixed price with penalties for failing to meet all the performance requirements. And they convinced me that I needed to make a movie. I said, not me, and Connie Lau, who was a dear friend, who was the original program manager and who said, you're gonna make a movie. So I made a movie, and when I was part of the proposal.
We were so certain of the win. We called ourselves a winning team, took pictures.
As good as the A-7 proposal was, one of the darkest days in American history might have eclipsed the entire program of the Texas-based manufacturer.
That was 1963, and we won the competition. But Kennedy got assassinated in '63 in November, and they would not let him announce the winner. And they wanted to change it because of Kennedy's assassination.
We thought that we were gone because Kennedy was killed here, and there was no love lost between the East and the West in this country, and especially when you're talking politics.
The A-7's future was in turmoil. However, clearer heads would prevail at the Navy Bureau of Aviation. Politics were put aside, and the best interest of the nation and Navy were put at the forefront.
Two people stopped that, George Spangenberg, who was charged of evaluation, and Hank Surstead, who was a Navy program manager. They refused to concede. And finally, in 1964, March, they announced the winner, and we were the winners.
In recognition of its great potential, the A-7 would share its name with a fine lineage of Vought aircraft, all called Corsairs.
The original Corsair was the O2U, built in 1926. Another follow-on version, the O4U, was a Corsair that it could be called the Corsair II. Then the F4U was the Corsair, maybe the Corsair III. Goodyear built some of the F2G1s, the beefed-up Corsairs. Maybe those were Corsair 4s. So this thing may have actually been the Corsair 5 from a technical standpoint, but Vaught's penchant for naval names, Corsair, Cutlass, Pirate, kind of fell in line with it.
The Corsair also had a less complimentary nickname, the Slough.
The rather stubby, less elegant look compared to the F-8, which was really the last of the gunfighters, and rightly so. It was referred to as the Slough, short, little, ugly, you know.
September 26, 1965, was a key moment in the A-7's history. It was the day the A-7 would spread its wings for the first time with its first flight.
The first flight we ran at Hensley. John Conrad, the pilot, and I'm at the tower, and John takes off. Well, it's fine, it's fine. Pretty soon he says, I'm coming back in. He had a car that had a lot more in it. He landed, and I said, okay, John, what's the problem? He says, there's a tail buffet. I said, well, what could cause that? Because we sure didn't have that in an F-8. So I called George Upton, who was chief of aero, and he came over. I said, what do you think, George? We had to put a flap on the A-7 because it didn't raise the wing. It was fixed.
LTV would iron out these initial problems. As part of LTV's contract with the Navy, the aircraft manufacturer made a long list of guarantees. Every single one of them were met or exceeded, save for one. But it was a penalty that paid off for LTV.
There was a penalty for the weight. We paid $275,000 in penalties because our wing was heavier, which made the airplane heavier, than was called for. We paid that price, which allowed us in later years, we could carry a lot more stores on the main wing beam.
One of the most remarkable aspects of the A-7 program was just how quickly the aircraft progressed from the drawing board to the air and into service with the Navy.
It was about 20 months from contract initiation till the prototype flew, which was a very quick time. Some had actually done faster, like some of Kelly Johnson's amazing thing, but for a tactical airplane in that time frame, 20 months from contract to prototype flight was amazing.
A little over a year from first flight to delivery. 15 months it was in combat, which I can't conceive of over 20 years for the F-22, from contract award to delivery of the first airplane, over 20 years. What do you do for 20 years? The F-35, gonna be about 15.
The need to begin rolling aircraft off the assembly line was undeniable. In 1964, the same year LTV won the contract, the fallout from the Gulf of Tonkin incident led the U.S. into a full-scale war in Vietnam. The A-7 became operational in 1967. It was first distributed to A-4 squadrons on both the Atlantic and Pacific coasts as part of a transition and upgrade to the new lightweight bomber. Though it quickly became a favorite amongst pilots, the team at LTV recognized the first models would need some adjustments to deal with the real-world battlefield conditions in Vietnam.
I said, there's two things are wrong with this thing. The engine doesn't have enough thrust, and you ought to put in a bigger engine, but you're going to have to make that change because you set the engine requirement at the beginning. And the second, you don't have the ECM gear in it, and this airplane's going to need it over in Vietnam. No, we don't need it. About a quarter of the way through A-7A, the Navy came in, and at this stage of the game, the program manager was Tom Gallagher. He says, Sal, he says, we're going to have you put in provisions. I said, you're going to stop the line? Yeah. I said, it ain't fixed price anymore. He said, no. So the A-7B was established.
The ECM gear, or electronic countermeasures, could jam or deceive enemy radar, and a more powerful engine helped with the hot, humid jungle conditions, which could make for sluggish takeoffs.
The A-7As flew with the TF-30 P6 engine. That put out about 11,200 pounds of thrust. Pretty good for the airplane at the time. The A-7B had a modification with what they call beep flaps to help reduce drag on acceleration and get some better takeoff and climb performance. And they used the TF-30 P8 that bumped the thrust up to about 12,300 pounds of thrust.
Like a father watching over his newborns, Saul Love deployed with the first A-7s to Vietnam. Or at least he attempted to, before the North Koreans shattered the Navy's plan.
I started then with the A-7 deploying with the 1st Squadron to Tonkin Bay, and one of the things I have in my office is Tonkin Bay Golf Club, I guess it is. And I'm on the Hancock, we're on the way, and you remember the Pueblo incident, where North Korea took over the Pueblo, and the Hancock gets orders to change their deployment to the Sea of Japan with the A-7s. And the skipper calls me, he says, you got a choice, Mr. Love. He said, you can take a chopper over to the Ticonderoga and go to the Tonkin Gulf and then get to wherever you're gonna go. Or you can stay on the Hancock and maybe we can offload you at Kubi. So we chose to take the chopper over the Ticonderoga rather than end up at the Sea of Japan. And the Admiral flies over with his band. We're going to the Tonkin Gulf. The Admiral's there with the Navy band. So I ended up spending the night in the wardroom of the Ticonderoga, but that's how much I missed the first deployment of A-7s.
The A-7s ultimately arrived in Vietnam. They immediately began taking over for the A-4s, which had been spearheading the Navy's light bomber attack missions.
When they initially deployed to Vietnam to begin replacing the A-4, the light attack strike mission that the A-4 had been doing exclusively took over that mission, but could do it with a much more reliable platform, with better accuracy, better on-station time, better range, and better maintainability. The A-4, man-hours per flight hour, was something like double or triple what the A-7 was. So overall, all the way around, winning in all categories.
The A-7 was an exceptional aircraft and filled the Navy's need for a light bomber in the jungles of Vietnam. It was so impressive, some wondered whether it might serve double duty with the United States Air Force. They were already using the Navy's aging A-1 Skyraider as close support aircraft. So why not use the Navy plane for the Skyraider's replacement? It certainly fell in line with Secretary of Defense McNamara's focus on aircraft commonality.
The big push in the early 60s that really was driven heavily by Secretary of Defense McNamara when he took office in January of 61 was they wanted to have commonality amongst platforms. The thought was, for sure, if you have the same aircraft, you'd save a lot of money.
Although requiring the services to use the same platform could be a money saver, it could also be a disaster. Under the TFX program, the Navy was supposed to adopt the F-111, an aircraft largely based on Air Force requirements. It turned out to be a formula for disaster. The Navy F-111B was overweight and underpowered and canceled after just 7 aircraft were constructed. Would the Air Force have better luck adapting the Navy's A-7?
The problem was the Air Force leading it didn't ever seem to work out. But by the time the Naval study was completed and the Navy was running with the A-7 program, the Air Force saw the promise in that airframe as new technologies, very efficient airframe, great bombing capability, and they determined that we should get those too. So the Secretary of Defense assigned the Air Force a program in 1965 to work with the Navy to develop another version of the A-7 for the Air Force's use.
The Navy bought it. The Air Force was forced to buy it by DOD, but it turned out to be one of the best buys they ever made, a screaming bargain. The airplanes were delivered for around $2 million a piece.
The Air Force would take an already exceptional A-7 design and make it even better, insisting on a whole host of electronic upgrades and more powerful engine.
The A-7's early version was really a replacement for the A-4, a pretty basic jet with some modern technologies coming in, some bomb intervalometers and things like that, and a TF-30 engine, pretty good technology for the time. But the Air Force got involved and said, we'll have a common airframe, we'll use this, but we want a lot more changes.
Adapting the A-7 design made sense. The Air Force knew the A-7 was a solid airframe to build upon, and modifying it would rapidly provide them with a modern-day replacement for the Skyraider. Still, the services had an inherent reluctance to borrow aircraft from each other.
Over my years in the industry, I discovered the personality of the services. The guy who has a bunch of money operates differently than a guy that doesn't have much money. The big Air Force pays more for everything. Now, I'm not from an Air Force background, but I come to know the Air Force as the biggest committee at the longest table on earth.
The Air Force was very demanding about the features and performance it expected from the A-7D. Instead of frustrating the company, they pushed the engineers at LTV to deliver a state-of-the-art aircraft.
I was the lead designer on the A-7, and I sure absorbed all the heat from the Navy and Air Force on the A-7DE. The Air Force program manager, he wanted a full digital airplane. There wasn't one flying at that day. And he also wanted a heads-up display. And so I sent John Conrad over to Europe to fly the heads-up display in the Buccaneer, which was an analog. And nobody in this country would bid on the thing other than a best effort. The only one who would bid on it was Elliott's in London. They had developed the one on the Buccaneer. So we placed a contract with them, and I will tell you, they did an outstanding job on that thing. Although we had some fun in the process because interesting country. Come tea time, everybody shuts down.
The A-7 was the first all-digital electronic airplane. It had the first HUD, the first head-up display. It had the first digital nav web delivery system that worked. The A6 was the A6 had, it wasn't working on the A6. Their development problems continued on. The A7 was working immediately.
A whole host of new technologies went into the avionics. This had to do with a forward-looking ranging radar that had terrain following, terrain avoidance capability. A very complex weapon system involved a miniaturized digital computer that was kind of the first of its kind, a very complex HUD system that was driven by the computer that showed flight symbology with a velocity vector, pitch lines, so that the pilot could look out the window straight ahead and get information about altitude, airspeed, dive angle, flight path, and then even have information from radar warning receivers about potential missile threats displayed right in his head without ever having to look inside the cockpit. And that was important because they were developing what we would call today the HOTAS methods of flying, hands on stick and throttle all the time, never having to reach in to change things around. So that level of technology was put into the A-7 under the Air Force's guides.
Seeing the advanced avionics and weapon system in the proposed USAF A-7D model, the Navy wanted to take advantage of the same technology for themselves and incorporate it into their own aircraft. These would become the A-7E models.
The Navy was saying, great, we'll add some things here too. We'll add a few more things for carrier suitability. And in short order, you had the A-7 in two major models, the A-7D and the A-7E. And not much difference internally for both airplanes.
Both the USAF Corsairs and the new Navy models would take advantage of more powerful engines.
When the Air Force made the modifications to build the D model, they went another step further with the Rolls-Royce Spade design, TF-41, and that one took the thrust up to about 14,500 pounds of thrust. Pretty significant increase. And later on, when the A-7E was built by the Navy, they just took a little tweak on the TF-40 design, and it was a TF-40 A2 that another 500 pounds, and that rounded out at pretty close to 15,000 pounds of thrust. So from the original A to the final version E, you're talking about a nearly 40% increase in thrust overall. So pretty good specs and maintained pretty good fuel efficiency the whole time.
The avionics were what really made these two new A-7 models stand out from the crowd. Pilots could leave the driving to the aircraft as they sped to the target.
I think it was one of the finest airplanes we ever built. The Navy loved the airplane. They could dial in a point they wanted to go, set the compass and forget it because it would automatically adjust the thrust and everything else. And we discovered that it was more accurate than some of the geodetic surveys. They found that some of the geodetic surveys at Yuma were wrong because of what the airplane did with the platform.
The pinpoint bombing accuracy of the new A-7s would make them the pride of the Navy and Air Force and the envy of the aerospace world.
Everybody was surprised at the accuracy of the bomb delivery. I remember I had to make a presentation to DDR&E in the Pentagon, and he said, "What makes you think you can do this? I've been trying to do this on the GD supersonic bombers." He said, "I can't get them to do it." And I said, "I'm not GD, I'm Vought."
The Navy's A-7Es began arriving in Vietnam in May of 1970. They were an excellent upgrade for the already outstanding A-7As, still pounding away at enemy forces. The A-7Es' avionics and weapons delivery systems made them well suited for precision strikes in close support missions. Capable of carrying a wide range of ordnance in all weather conditions, day or night, the A-7Es were a versatile multi-role aircraft.
You talk about air-to-ground capabilities, the A-7 was designed to carry, for the most part, I think, anything in the air-to-ground inventory that existed at the time. It could drop anything. Additionally, the air-to-ground mission would require strafing at some point.
The guys over at Thompson Newt would tell me what they'd do is they'd go from the carrier, they'd drop down to sea level and start the gun and just wipe out the and then fly back up again.
So the early version had a pair of Colt Mark 12 20mm cannon with about 500 rounds of available. Later in the A-7D and A-7E modifications, that would be switched out to the unbelievably effective and really fun to shoot M61A1 Vulcan hydraulic powered, electrically fired 20mm cannon. The cool thing about that weapon is that cockpit in-flight selectable, you could pick 4,000 rounds a minute or 6,000 rounds a minute. And frankly, 6,000 rounds a minute is a lot of fun, but you got an increased chance of jamming. And if you can't hit it at 4,000, 6,000 rounds a minute, it's not going to help you.
The Air Force's A-7Ds would arrive later in the conflict. They would make a name for themselves, taking over for the A-1 Sky Raiders on sandy missions, providing cover to helicopter crews as they attempted to rescue downed pilots. On November 18, 1972, Major Colin A. Clark led an 8.8-hour combat search and rescue mission to recover a downed F-105 Thunder Chief pilot. Taking several hits, his rugged A-7D was able to withstand the 12.7mm flak fire of enemy forces. Major Clark's courage would win him the Air Force Cross and his aircraft a place at the National Museum of the USAF at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It's not surprising, given its capability and durability, that the A-7 was well loved by pilots in both branches of the armed services.
I still talk to guys who flew A-7Ds and Es who just love the airplane. I have a letter from Bob Baldwin, who was one of the original F-8 pilots, who was at that time, after I retired, he had the 7th Fleet. He said, we're just bringing the A-7Es aboard, and boy, do everybody love it. So they were good airplanes, and they were reliable.
From all the people that I knew flying it, we loved it. It was a great airplane to fly, great weapon system, easy to understand and employ. It took some practice to really fine-tune it and learn how to finesse the airplane. It wasn't like a real hog to drive around the sky. It was pretty honest and very controllable. Around the ship, you had to be careful because you do have to slow it way down, and the engine response wasn't the best around. It didn't spool up like a turbojet would. So you did have to keep your power up and keep the thrust running to bring it aboard. If you got very far under power at all, the LSOs would give you the Eat at Joe's lights and you're out of there, because they couldn't let you kind of work the bottom side of the glide slope. But as far as flying it, I don't recall ever talking to an A-7 pilot that didn't really like flying the airplane. And the A-4 guys that transitioned to it all seemed to love it too.
I have stories of guys tell me that they'd get into a maneuver, didn't know where they were, and they just hit the autopilot and the airplane righted itself. You just dialed in where you wanted to go and you went there. It was a good airplane. The Air Force liked it.
Looking for the things that are less desirable, when you consider the mission it had to do in the operational environment, it pretty much hit all the nails directly on the head. When you start getting into things that you might not like about the airplane, they probably fall into the esoteric creature comfort type of areas. For sure, it is a hot airplane. And there's a term we refer to on the carrier, we call it the barbecue pit, where the A-7s were usually parked adjacent to each other right in front of the island. And we're starting up and closing the canopies, getting ready for launch, as the F-14s are parked in a row around in front of us, getting ready to move to the cats first. And all the plane cabs are standing around roasting, and you're just sucking up all this hot air in a cockpit that's closed with not enough airflow from your engine to cool it down, as the fumes from the F-14s get pushed into the cockpit, and your eyes start to burn in water unbelievably. And if you look at movies around, once in a while you'll see planes parked in front of the island waiting to go, and you'll see the pilots sitting there like this as if they're holding their... You're actually, if you pull your oxygen mask down and let the oxygen blow across your eyeballs, they stop burning. I mean, that's how bad it was. And you had to have that mask on so you're not sucking fumes. But that's a miserable few minutes waiting to launch in the barbecue pit. You can't go anywhere, but part of the game.
The Air Force and the Navy A-7s left Vietnam with impressive records. The Air Force A-7Ds flew a total of 12,928 combat sorties with just 6 losses, the best record of any U.S. fighter. The Navy A-7s were equally successful, hitting and destroying countless targets, including the Than Hau Bridge. On October 6, 1972, 4 A-7s carrying a combination of conventional and television-guided walleye bombs were able to break the bridge in half, knocking it out for the rest of the war. Like every great airplane, there comes a time when a new aircraft emerges with even more advanced capabilities to supplant it. After finishing operations in Vietnam, A-7Ds operating out of Korat, Thailand, were utilized in Cambodia against the Khmer Rouge. When they returned home to the U.S., the aircraft were transferred to the Air National Guard. Vought would reconfigure the A-7 into a deadly night attacker for the ANG under the LANA program.
Jim Reed would jump in the airplane, set it in the computer, jump in the airplane, take off, turn it over the computer. At night, 500 knots over the deck at night, come to the target, pull up, drop the bomb, come home, and Jim would never have to touch the controls till he got to back to Hensley. Now that's given the years I was on, that is an incredible avionics, incredible engineering feat. But that's the kind of people we had.
Though A-7s had a distinguished record in Vietnam, the Air Force still held a grudge about using a Navy aircraft for its missions. They were eager to develop their own close support aircraft and would choose the A-10 Thunderbolt II as the A-7D's replacement. The Navy A-7s would have a longer tenure and would participate in Operation Desert Storm and Shield in the 1990s, in important but much smaller roles compared to Vietnam. Even by the late 70s, a new multi-role fighter had been in the works, which would supplant the A-7 on the U.S. Navy's carriers.
By the late 70s, the A-7 was already aging out as a weapons platform and new technology were coming. The F-14 was getting along in its tooth already too, so a new jet was called for, and the fourth generation F-18 was beginning to roll off the drawing board. A very capable airplane with the newer technologies and the awesome F-404 engines. That was coming out, hitting the fleet in about 1983 timeframe. The transition plan was pretty much that A-7 squadrons would transition to the F-18, and it was a clean transition since they were both single-seat aircraft initially. If you look at the HUD design of the F-18, it's very identical to the A-7. That basic layout is pretty much how it works, and that's the standard.
Though the F-18 was a next-generation aircraft, the A-7 could still hold its own in a bombing competition, given its advanced avionics and weapons delivery systems.
In the early 80s, I can recall being at Cecil Field at a squadron picnic with VA-46 when we heard a really strange loud noise, and we all looked up and we saw the first F-18s in the break coming in to land at Cecil Field, and we're all just dumbfounded watching and said, they're here. And as we're watching them land, we're all saying, they're going to have to earn their spot at the bar. And in short order, we were having bombing contests. And at first, we were out bombing them because they had a new airplane that was much more capable, but they hadn't really learned it yet. Eventually, they'd be right in there and started winning some bombing contests. But the A-7 held its own for a while because it's just a really good bombing platform and very accurate.
Lieutenant Commander Michael Psycho McLeod had an opportunity to fly both the A-7 and F-18 for the U.S. Navy. He originally saw the A-7 as merely a stepping stone for the F-18, but the older aeroplane quickly became a favorite.
The F-18 was just coming out in '83, and I was right in the middle of flight school, so that was the way to go. Then, as I got to fly the airplane, I learned more about it. It was just a very honest, sweet flying airplane. And then the mission was fantastic too. Low-level attack. It has some self-defense capability with the AIM-9 sidewinders. So it pretty much was a jack-of-all-trades airplane. Very efficient, good fuel specs. You can stay airborne a long time, and great to fly around the boat. My last A-7 flight was at VX-5 at China Lake, just finishing up that 3-year tour doing test work. I like going to air shows and seeing all the restored aircraft at museums. The problem you have is that there's no restored A-7s. There's nothing out there flying around. So unless you can find one at a museum, it's a kind of a rare bird to get your hands on. I have a few friends that work here at the Valiant Air Command Warbird Museum, and they said I could come up and see the airplane and get up inside and take a look at the cockpit and visit where I used to work. Looks like it'll be a real fun thing to do today. Norm, how you doing?
Hi, welcome.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you at the Valiant Air Command.
Glad to be here.
Right.
I'm glad you guys called. You're moving the A-7 around today, respotting the hangar.
Reclaiming certain parts of it, yes.
Well, look what I got.
Oh.
I don't know if you've seen one of these in a while.
Not a real one.
This is my A-7E pocket checklist that I used when I was flying at VX5 at China Lake. That was the one I carried with me in my G-suit pocket. I'd swap them out. If I was going out in the A-7, I'd throw that in the pocket. If I was going out in the F-18, I'd swap them out. But
It just says A7, so you
Yep.
got the right one.
that's the one I was using, and I haven't used that thing in 27 years.
It looks like brand new.
A little dog-eared around the edges, but it's got some work.
So, I'm a little ignorant. What does automatic carrier landing do? You taking
Ah.
the plane lands, or how does
That's
that work?
actually, it's one of the things, the A-7 was one of the first aircraft set up, fully qualified to do automatic carrier landings. When it did the first flight tests, it went out with the A-7 flew with the F-4. The system is called the Spin 42, and it locks up the airplane, and the tractor beams essentially grab you, and the airplane flies itself to a landing right in the wires. Automatic power control, flies itself.
Just tell me some classified information.
Nope, it's run-of-the-mill equipment today. It's normal things.
Okay, this is amazing. Absolutely amazing.
We used to
The fact
test
you
them once.
survived is amazing.
Not a problem with the good machinery we had, but yeah, the automatic landing was something that we didn't do too often, but I can remember one night coming back really late, and I was beat, and I was just thinking, I don't know if I'm going to make a real good pass on this, and I called them up. They said, is the Spin 42 up? And they said, it is. Get the data link. I'll bring me home. I want to take an automatic landing.
You want to see your airplane?
It's out there in the hangar now?
Sure, it sure is.
Let's go see it.
Can I hold on this for a while?
Sure,
Carry this, you look at the
sure.
airplane. Come on.
Nice.
This way.
Here it is. Nice. Nice job. Excellent.
Thank you. These guys, everybody helps. Everybody works. Andy.
Nice.
Pleasure to meet you,
Nice
sir.
to meet you, Andy.
Tom.
Hey, Tom. Excellent.
So we're happy you're here.
Thanks for inviting me out. Nice work you guys are doing out here. This is tough machines to keep in this kind of condition. I mean,
Thank you.
with all the alloys and titanium, I guess corrosion is your worst enemy, but you guys look like you've conquered it. Great. So how long have you actually had this airplane here?
It's been here a few years now. Just finished restoring about a year and a half ago.
How long did that whole process take?
Some airplanes 4 years, some 2, some 1.5.
Wow. Keep
Yeah.
you busy.
Some 7.
Do you also restore the cockpit too?
This one, yes.
Really? Mm-hmm. Any chance I could take a peek in the office?
For special people, yes.
I haven't seen the inside of one of these things in 27 years.
You're special people.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Okay.
Great. Wow, there it is. Nice. Okay, some habits die hard, making sure the seat's not armed before you step in it. And never step on the seat if you can avoid it. Excellent. Much better visibility than an airliner, that's for sure. Climb in the cockpit and you do a sweep starting at the aft left console, you check your oxygen and G-suit connections, make sure those are in there. Go through all your avionics, engine controls, jettison circuits, gear handle, emergency power package, all the flight instruments. And that's the weapons delivery system for the early A and B models. Later the radar display moved down there. And before the more complex HUD, just had a kind of rudimentary combiner glass for bomb depression angle on a mill reticle you could set. The always friendly tail hook handle. Some tack-in, radios, navigation computer, and a glove box for some things. And way down here, the wing fold mechanism. Lift this handle up and there's a toggle switch in there to spread and fold the wings. All the important parts. Nothing like throwing the hook down on the way back to the ship, getting ready to land. Cool.
The A-7 is a particularly important aircraft. It served well. The pilots liked it. It executed everything a pilot asked it to do. The pilots that flew those things swear by it. So when we had the opportunity to grab that airplane, we wanted to restore it in its original configuration with the Death Head logo. So it took about 1.5 years to do that, but we're very happy with the results.
Good to go.
By the late 1980s, the A-10 was a decade-old platform, and the USAF was considering its options for ground support. The Vought team came up with an out-of-the-box solution. Why not use an A-7, the very plane the A-10 had replaced?
The Y-7F came out of a very aggressive effort by a couple of Vought people who responded to an Air Force request for a study of ground support machinery. And instead of responding with the study that they asked for, we responded with a proposal for what we call the strike fighter, which we took the A-7D airframe and put in an F-100 engine, much more modern engine, more thrust. And with the additional power, we could take off with our maximum loads. The airplane A-7 already carried an incredible amount of ordnance. We could honk that load off in far less distance and operate out of smaller fields. It allows you to deliver weapons with much greater accuracy, and is a much more economical airplane to operate. You can have lots more of them around, and numbers do count in wars.
The YA-7F could have been a rapid-fire solution to the USAF's needs. But it had one feature the Air Force couldn't live with. It was a Navy plane.
It was successful. We got the Air Force's attention, and we got a contract for 2 airplanes. We built the 2 airplanes. The airplane was flight tested, very successful. There were 2 elements that affected it. One was we stopped marketing once we got the contract, which is death when you deal with a Navy contractor with the Air Force, and that is they don't want another Navy airplane.
The A-7, a stable and reliable platform, continued to serve in the U.S. Armed Services into the early 90s. Other countries operated them for even longer. The Corsair IIs just missed out on their golden anniversary. The Hellenic Air Force A-7s were retired in 2014, 49 years after the first prototype flight. From 1918 to 2014, 96 years, Vought aircraft were in continuous use by the Navy and other nations around the world. Full credit for the design, manufacture, and development of this remarkable aircraft has to go to the Vought team behind it.
We had the best engineering department in the world. I want to tell you, I spent 2 years in the Pentagon, and I never met an engineering department as good as the one that we had.
I think the engineer design team at Vought really hit the mark. They were smart in that they took a lot of lessons learned from their early years and modified that into a new attack platform.
Hugely successful program. Everything was a delight because the company was a family. And there was simply no comparison in the way they operated.
The legacy of the A-7 is something the Vought family can be proud of. It was ahead of its time technologically and would influence future generations of aircraft. The Corsair IIs also had an impeccable military record. Flying in an A-7, a pilot knew that his aircraft was a partner who had his back during the mission and ensured he got home safely. Today, A-7s can be found in aviation museums across America, a worthy place to celebrate this great aeroplane and to teach the next generation about its storied history.